Another episode of Unfiltered coming your way. This is episode number 51, which I believe, was that the number that Mel Rojas wore as a Met? Was it? Did he wear 51? He was somewhere in I think he did at some point in his career. Did he with the Mets? I think he might have,
so.
right? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think so, which is, not a good way to start because we're not talking about overrated Mets that we can't stand. Today, it is another and Appreciate You Unfiltered Band top 10 list. It is the top 10 most underrated Mets of all time. Brian Wright is joining me. You can get him at Brian Wright 86 on Twitter, author and historian, and way smarter than I am in terms of the older days of the Mets before he and I had to look like we carried any age. Although I think both of us, actually, Brian, could still play the younger brother on a sitcom.
Yes, I often get, and thank you for having me on, Casey. It's great to be with you. And we're definitely trying this again. Had some audio issues, but we're trying this again. It's gonna, even though it's Mel Rojas's number with the episodes, I think that's not a bad omen. But yeah, no, I've always been told I look younger than I am, and I will take that as a compliment.
Oh yes, yeah. I always say the difference between, like, when you want to really know when somebody, and I bartended many years ago, but you want to know when somebody's using a fake ID. If you try and ask somebody for ID and they get excited like I do now, then you know they're definitely of age. If they look like they're terrified or worried, it's because they're not. Because everybody who's actually that age, if you think I'm 21, you're like my favorite person ever. So, even though, clearly looking at you on the screen, I know I need to shave. I want to get into a number of things here. And of course, get us at Casey Stern at Brian Wright 86. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of different, debates and things about these lists. One thing that I did, and I'm happy that we're doing this, and we are doing this here for the second time, but it'll feel like the first. Ironically, it would have been Armando Benitez's number, and now it's Mel Rojas. And really, maybe I should have just made it Benny Agbayani in the middle, who's not on our list, so don't get upset, Met fans. But I went back and I was watching a lot of the highlights from, like, on YouTube from the 99 season, from 2000, from 86, from where some of our guys were today. And it kind of, it brought up some news stories and things that I want to bring up. But I want to start here. And that is how much, I'm sure, like I do, a lot of Yankee fans, right? And because of all the rings and all the history, they have more than we do. They have more history than we do of greatness. How much do you think, having gone through this, that it's underrated just how much greatness has passed through this franchise? From outsiders or people who don't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, I think not only from, like, Yankee fans' perspectives, but, like, just other general baseball fans. I mean, I have people I know who, when I tell them I love the Mets, and I tell them about, a World Series that they were in like 2015, they look at me going, "They were?" Like, I tell them about a World Series the Mets won in '86, they go, "They did?" And it's like people just they have this perception, and partially true, that the Mets are just the team that just always falls flat on its face, when there have been times of not only great teams but great players, and especially, like, from the pitching side. I mean, I would put the Mets pitchers up against the Yankees, and I feel like, the Mets best pitchers up against the Yankees best pitchers all time, with obviously more time to pick through. And I'd be pretty confident in the Mets, arms that I would put out there versus the Yankees. So there are, I think there is sometimes a perception. Like I said, sometimes correct, sometimes exaggerated, that the Mets have had great players come through. I think it always gets overridden by the failures.
And, a lot of the people that we're going to have on our list today are actually really great baseball players who had really good careers, but they seem to be somehow underrated in Mets lore. And then there's that whole thing, are they underrated as players? Are they underrated as Mets? Just to use the Yankees as an example, because I don't want to even accidentally give away any of our list yet, a guy like Bernie Williams, to me, is not overrated at all. He's not a Hall of Famer, and I never thought of him that way, and even looking at the numbers. But is he a Yankee all-time player? He is, and he should be accepted and lauded and applauded for all of that. There are a lot of Mets that nationally, I think we don't realize on the outside, and even inside the fan base, we don't realize how great they are. The one thing I wanted to say before we get to this list that I thought was important to point out, and I'm curious if you're this way, because we're seeing it, just take this year as an example, right? Like, even the stories of, Vogelbach, and who knows what kind of moments these guys will have when we get there, right? The Luis Guillormes, and you think about, really, let's be fair, like what Adavito has been, and he's been brilliant, right? There are going to be a lot of guys that we kind of, you don't forget them until somebody reminds you. It says, "Oh my God, remember that guy?" And that's what was great about Old Timers Day. How about how many godsend kind of a players? Like, just to give you some of the guys I was thinking about this morning when I was thinking about bringing this up on the show today when we did this better version of it, of course. I was thinking of like the Melvin Moras, right? Before the trade, and you think about the run in '99, and people forget like how big he was in that run, right? And into the playoffs in a game 162 to get to 163 and all of that sort of stuff. You think about, I even think through like, some of the odd years, like Sean Dunston during a very small appearance with the Mets, including, by the way, a game I was at. They had fireworks night last night. Fireworks night in the late 90s, and it might have been 99. The biggest comeback in Met history. I was at that game against the Braves where they scored, I think it was 8 runs with 2 outs in the 8th inning or whatever. And Dunston had a big at bat. Bubba Trammell, remember him when he came over? Like, how many times do you sit there with like fellow Met fans and like, I always say, like, play this game of like random Mets? And it's amazing, isn't it? Like how many have like fond memories and places in our hearts that, like, if you told somebody who's not part of this like fandom or this insanity, they would think you're nuts. Like, why do you care about this player? Does that happen to you also over the years?
Oh, definitely. Like, I'll mention someone, I don't know. I'm trying to think of someone from the '99 team, which is my favorite Met team of my lifetime, and I can remember just about everyone. And then, you talk about a couple years ago, I can't remember anyone who passed through. I mean, I can remember a few, but certainly not as many as the '99 team. And I can remember, I can think I was watching an 2000 Division Series game, and Rick White
Rick
pitched. This is the
White.
Benny Agba. This is the
Yes.
Benny. This was the Benny Agbayani 13th inning home run walk-off against the Giants, and Rick White pitched 2 great innings. I think he struck out like Barry Bonds to end the top of the 13th or something. I'm like, gosh, I remember him. I didn't remember he did that in that division series game and wound up getting the victory. So, and I think about this year and 20 years from now, who, like you said, who knows how it all ends. But you think of like, he's certainly better than just a role player, but like Mark Canha is going to get a lot of remembrance because of his clutch hitting. To me, David Peterson has been a godsend doing what he
Amazing.
did, especially
Amazing.
when
Yes.
Scherzer was out. Trevor Williams just kind of being that Swiss Army knife in terms of starting and coming in long relief. So I think you're going to, these guys are. This is not going to end in terms of down the line. You go like, oh, remember that player who is going to get maybe largely forgotten. If they win it all. It's they're going to get up on a pedestal. But those are those players that you just like. They did small things, but to you, they're huge.
Kirk Neuenhuis, right, with the game-winning homer. They might write some of those moments. And now we never forget, unfortunately, Jeremy Burnitz or Mel Rojas or Braden Looper or Armando Benitez or, Kevin Apier or like however many other guys you want to come up. I mean, there's so many. A lot of these names that we're going to bring up are big time names in Met lore, but I like the list we put together because I think they're all underrated for different reasons. So let's begin top 10 most underrated Mets of all time at number 10 with Johnny Franco. First of all, we deal with Timmy Trumpet right now, and I'm not comparing it, but Johnny Be Good, and I'm a huge Back to the Future guy, was one of the great walkout tunes ever. Like between, Al Leiter, who may or may not be on our list, right, from Tom's River with Springsteen with Born to Run, and John we had some of the great like tunes that like in their own right, if you were a Met fan, like you were just locked into. When you think of John Franco, you think of almost Mr. Met because he's from the area, because of 9/11 and 9/21/01, right, and all of that. But he gets underrated, and I want to start with the longevity. 14 years. I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
the list is, but how many Mets have even played for that long with the franchise? Cannot be many. His longevity, Brian's got to be almost where we start with Johnny Franco.
Yeah, I mean, the only other person I could think of who played longer would be like Ed Kranepool. And he was not, in a full-time role for part of that time. So, I mean, you would never see a pitcher be of his type, be the closer or a high leverage reliever for one. You would never see a pitcher be a high leverage reliever for like one team for that long. And you would never see a reliever or closer like him where he was more finesse, not like Edwin Diaz throwing 103 miles an hour down the middle. He was a guy who was, like I said, finesse pitcher who would drive you nuts occasionally, but more or less got the job done. Got saves, with regularity, even for bad teams. He led the league in saves in 1990, which was his first year as a Met. Led the league in saves in '94 with 30, and had 30 or more saves as a Met 5 times over those 14 seasons. So, we talk about Benitez, Rojas, Braden Looper, go on and on. For all the bad relievers the Mets
Jorge
have had,
Julio. I mean, I'm just coming up with the names. Oh my
yeah,
goodness. Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
we should probably give praise to the ones that were good, and
Oh,
John Franco was good for a while.
without a doubt. And there is something to the fact that you just knew like he loved being a Met. Like I don't know, I'm sure other fan bases are this way, and I'm this way, with other teams that I root for, but not to the level in this category of the Mets. There's something about these Mets. It's why Bartolo Colon, look, the home run, yes, the size and all of that. But the fact that he wanted to keep coming back and not retire and just wanted to be a Met, that's what makes him now so beloved. Like he loved being a Met. Like that's all he ever wanted to do. The fact that Daniel Murphy came back, and even though he was with DC and we all know it, he never wanted to leave. And he was so excited to come back, and you saw him getting emotional. Like that's the kind of thing we love. And John Franco probably epitomizes that more than anybody. He's at number 9. We got a lot of pitchers and a lot of catchers on this list. And at number 9 is our first catcher. And what were the people in the stands? I don't remember how he referenced it, and I can't even remember what they were called. The people for Todd Hundley, like he had his own like pack of people. I don't even remember what they were, but Todd Hundley was in a time period where the Mets were not very good. Clearly the best player, and clearly the most recognizable player. And it was during a time where I remember, like, there are times with this franchise, Brian, where like they're barely on national TV, and like, if they ever were, it was his face. It was Todd Hundley in the Mets. I mean, he was the only guy that was anything. His chase for the home run for catchers. Before we get to what happened with Piazza, because I want to get into that, because that's part of why Hundley became so underrated. Why do you think Todd Hundley gets forgotten as much as he does? Because I still think he does. Even though there are Met fans who probably had him as their favorite player for a while, he still gets forgotten.
Yeah, and I'm one of them. I had him. He was my favorite player. I was, a kid in the 90s, and I grew up in DC, and the Mets were not on national TV all that much when they were. He was, as you said, the face of that team. And I think he gets, look, he had the most home runs by any Met in the 90s. I didn't realize how long he played with the Mets. He played them from 90 through 98. But had the most home runs of any Met in the 90s. For a time, had the most home runs by any Met in a single season when he hit 41 in 96 and broke the record for most home runs by a catcher. And then, 96 and 97 are one of the best 2-year stretches by a power hitter in Mets history. But it's because I think of the steroid era that he gets kind of those numbers get, kind of
Sure.
deflated. And the insertion of Piazza, the trade for Piazza, basically rendering Hundley useless, so to speak. He gets overshadowed.
Yeah, I mean, where would you rank Todd Hundley in left field in terms of the worst? So immediately I think of Roger Cedeno, which is the irony of Roger Cedeno being how fast he ran, yet still how terrible an outfielder he was. Daniel Murphy, when he was anywhere, let's be honest, but in left field even, right? The shortstop that wasn't Wilmer Flores, Mike Piazza at first base. And I don't say a catcher because he called a way better game than people give him credit for. And we know he couldn't throw runners out, right? Like, is Todd Hundley in left field in your lifetime the worst fielder at any position that the Mets have tried to put out there?
Yeah, that was the most unusual experiment. I was at a game at Shea Stadium in '98. It was actually against the Dodgers. And I think there were at least 2 instances in which, I mean, it was an adventure. I think there was twice where he just couldn't catch a fly ball, not to his fault. I mean, he was a catcher. It's not like he was supposed to be out there in left field. So, it was rough, but I mean, it was all the Mets doing. It wasn't like, he just was supposed to be out there and couldn't field. But I mean, it was probably the weirdest experiment. I mean, when there have been a lot, as you had noted. I mean, Dom Smith got in left field. He became a lot better
You're
in
better
left
than
field, but
Hundley. You're better than
still,
Hundley.
yeah, still an adventure. Todd Hundley was not.
Todd Hundley was Mike Morse in left field, and that's maybe the worst fielder I've ever seen. As bad as Adam Dunn was, Mike Morse might have been the worst left fielder I've ever seen. And Todd Hundley was, I mean, he made Daniel Murphy look like a Gold Glover out there. That's how bad. But you felt, plus you got catcher knees, and a catcher, catchers are not those kind of athletes outside of a few. Like Jason Kendall is one thing, Todd Hundley is another. Like, there was not going to happen. So he gets forgotten. And I think, and I've said this to you before, and I've said this to friends of mine who were, huge with me going all those games. I felt bad for him at the time because people kind of forgot about him. And really, he was like the ex-girlfriend that just nobody cared about anymore because you had the new one in Piazza, and away you go. But Todd Hundley at 9. So John Franco at 10, Todd Hundley at 9. At number 8, maybe the most emotional player the Mets have ever had. And he was on the mound, and he grew up a Met fan, and he was from Jersey and came into Born to Run. And everything about Al Leiter, who I still know and love, everything about him I loved as a Met. He still is another guy, loved being a Met. What will you remember most about Leiter, and why does he belong? Because we're in agreement, put this list together, but why do you think he's so underrated still as a Met in a lot of ways?
Well, I think we just talked about the steroid era and the inflated offensive numbers. And if you're a pitcher during that time, your stats, I mean, unless you're like Pedro Martinez, your stats, or Greg Maddux, your stats are going to get kind of inflated because of that. That being said, 1998, his first year with the Mets, was exceptionally good, even by the standards of that time. I mean, he had a 2.47 ERA, and his ERA plus, which is like, your ERA based on the rest of the league, was 170. So he was 70% better than the average pitcher then. So 170 is fantastic. Finished 6th in the Cy Young Award voting. But other than that, I remember him for, pitching just about every big game during those postseason runs in 99, 2000. And then, you can't forget the game in Cincinnati, the 1-game playoff for the wild card, the best game he ever pitched, and one of the best games any Mets ever pitched. So I just remember that he was out there for every big game. Didn't get a lot of wins, if you want, if that's important to anyone. But I remember he just had some tough luck losses in the postseason, despite some great performances. But yeah, you never confused by his emotion, because he was real. He was out there telling you exactly how he felt.
And I love that. And that was New York, and that was the Mets. And I would say, just to your point, I thought in 99 and 2000, which are 2 years we'll talk about a lot today, the 3 best pitching performances, in whatever order you want to put them, in those 2 years, and I'm curious your take on this, I thought in whatever order, were Leiter's game in Cincy, Bobby Jones's 1-hitter, and Mike Hampton's 3-hit shutout against the Cardinals. I mean, I thought those were probably, because of the importance of them, the 3 best pitching performances they got. But the other thing that people forget is that Leiter against the Yankees, like, that was one of those, like, look, I'm not comparing this to Serena Williams in a loss, which we just watched, right? And like learning as much in a loss about a competitor as you can in a win. But Leiter gave everything he had in that game, gave them a chance to win. And look, those Yankee teams, like, we don't want to give them any credit. That was difficult to hold that team at all. And Al wasn't overpowering. He was getting you with that cutter. Obviously, we remember, right, against righties. But I always thought that his fearlessness and his toughness, to your point of his emotion, were always like, and those aren't stats, so it's really hard to quantify that. But I always thought he became a fan favorite, and I'm curious your thought on it, more because of the way he was than even the way he pitched.
Yeah, I think he was I think when people can relate to the people out in the field, sometimes, and we'll get to other players who kind of don't act like it's a big effort to do something on the field. Maybe you can't relate to that person, and therefore it's harder to embrace them. But Al Leiter felt like it was, I don't want to say a struggle, but he was out there giving everything he had. And I think that's therefore that combined with being a local product meant it meant something to Mets fans. And then again, going to like the John Franco quotient, he wanted to be a Met. He loved being a Met. I think that all that combined, and the fact that he was just good, really factored in. And yeah, that game 5 against the Yankees. I mean, game 1 against the Yankees, he pitched very well. Game 5, I think he got up to like 146 pitches, which is just insane. I almost remember that loss more fondly than I do a lot of other, wins or from somebody else.
I'm with you on that. And I think that's where aces get defined in those kind of performances. We've seen a lot of those out of the Wainwrights and the Sabathias. And I'm bringing up aces who aren't at the Pedro level and the guys who don't get enough credit, to which Waino and Sabathia are two that I think of in that kind of category who deliver that kind of an outing. Lester at 8. Lester. Speaking of lefties with cutters. Al Leiter. At least he could hold runners a little better than John could. Hello, Terrence Score, the net hero now. Jerry Grody at number 7. For Met fans who are younger, and a lot of them who are watching, listen to this what do they need to know about Jerry Grody and why they need to know more about him?
Well, yeah, if you look at his stats, his, offensive production, you're not going to be that impressed. But that was, he was on a Mets team in the late 60s, early 70s that was reliant on great pitching and great defense. And being on the 1969 Mets just automatically gets you, elevated to hero status. But I think Jerry Grody deserves even more credit than he gets. Like I said, pitching and defense, he was tough on those pitchers, and those were young pitchers. I mean, we see how great Koosman and Seaver were, but they were young. I mean, they were just, first, second, third year pitchers. He was tough on them. But they swore by him, and he probably swore at them. He definitely swore at them. He was very, very tough behind the plate. So yeah, looking at stats are irrelevant. He's an impact player on those teams, and his leadership is invaluable. His defense was invaluable, throwing runners out. I remember there was a quote by Johnny Bench, who was the best defensive catcher ever. I think we can pretty much agree on that, and
yes.
Maybe him or Ivan Rodriguez.
Yeah, Pudge would be the only other guy. Yes.
Yeah, there's a quote that he said about Jerry Grody. He said, if Grody was on the Reds, I'd be playing third base. So that speaks to how great Jerry Grody was on defense.
And to your point, was kind of Brian like an identity guy. Really, everything about him really told you everything about the team. And honestly, it's very similar to our guy in John Stearns at number 6, because he was very similar that way. And, unfortunately, Mike Piazza not only ruined Todd Hundley at the time because he took his job, but every other Met catcher ever, because no, they didn't have those kind of numbers, right? Nobody else was putting those up. But Stearns, and so good to see him at Old Timers Day and to be able to do that in terms of health-wise, he's so beloved. I mean, hearing you mentioned quotes from other people. When you hear teammates talk about him, it's like, okay, you now almost got to go back and look deeper into what he did, because they're so fond of what he meant in that room and on the field.
Yeah, no, as you said, great to see him at Old Timers Day. I'd forgotten that he had been going through health issues, so it was nice to see him get such a great ovation, and hope the best for him going forward. But yeah, he gets overlooked because he was in between, Jerry Grody and Gary Carter, and then you have Hundley and Piazza later on. So he gets kind of lost in the shuffle. And that was during a period in which there weren't many, very good Mets. But he was an all-star 4 times. And, like I said, not a lot of great Mets to choose from, but it definitely was deserved. He was a better than league average hitter 5 times, which, as we know now, is much needed from the catching position. Sometimes you don't always get that. And also he stole 91 bases and 25.
Which I had no idea, by the way, until you told me the first time that we did this. I had no idea about that.
That is nuts. Yeah. They say, the old line is fast for a catcher, but he was actually a good base runner. He stole 25 in 1978, which is just remarkable for a catcher.
Number 10, Johnny Franco. Number 9, Todd Hundley. Al Leiter at 8, Jerry Grody at 7, John Stearns at 6, and the poor man's Greg Maddux, Rick Reed, at number 5. And I say that, tongue in cheek, because even though that used to get thrown on him, the reason for people who are young who did not watch Rick Reed was because, one of the great things about Greg Maddux, and I always used to say it was first of all, when he had his glasses on, he looked and then spoke this way, like he was like a doctor or a teacher. Like it wasn't even like he was a pitcher. he didn't have overpowering stuff. I'm not saying Rick Reed had Maddox's changeup. He did not, or his control, because no one did. But Rick Reed was getting you with guile and with really the simplistic nature of changing eye levels, 4 quadrants, and spotting a fastball early in the count. All the things that everyone else is trying to do, but he couldn't get behind because he couldn't overpower you with a DeGrom fastball if he was 3-1 or 2-0 in a count, or spot a curveball. He wasn't going to do that kind of thing. But his consistency level is so underrated that, to me, he is right where he belongs on this list, because people don't realize that, in large part because he was always that number 3 guy, right? He's the Chris Bassett of then, is probably the comp, right? Rick Reed was the I know what I'm getting, Brian, out of the Mets in a starting rotation for almost every year that he started for that team.
Yeah, he was definitely that bulldog mentality who would just get you through a game and always give you a good start. You wouldn't get like a ridiculously bad one. A great story as a replacement player back in the after the strike, and who I can't even think of how many replacement players eventually became regular big leaguers, but
I can't
he's
think of
one of the
any,
few.
honestly.
Yeah. So I mean, he turned into a number 3 in a rotation for a team that was in the postseason 2 years in a row. So I didn't realize how good his 1998 was. I mean, he was his 97. He was an All-Star in 98, and also an All-Star in 2001. As in his last year with the Mets before he got traded. But 97 was especially good. He was 2.89 ERA, 141 ERA plus. He only walked 31, and then in 98 he only walked 29. So we talk about great control. That was certainly the case those 2 years. But the game I remember he pitched that was, to me, most significant was late in the season in 1999 against Pittsburgh. I think there were 2 games back of the wild card, or maybe a game back at the time. They needed that win, and he pitched a complete game. Just a huge performance. So yeah, I mean, I think I never remember a bad Rick Reed start. I mean, I'm not, that 99 game I remember stands out because of how important it was, but yeah, you could always count on him for a good pitching performance and not overpowering, but he got it done.
All 3 of those games against Pittsburgh were close. All were crazy. And my favorite lasting memory is in that last game. I think it was Brad Klontz, who was the pitcher who throws the wild pitch to score a run. And if you watch, getting caught on camera, not always good. Mike Piazza, literally in the midst of, like, you won, like you're going to the next day, and Piazza was upset. Like, he throws his arms up, like as if to say, like, what the hell? I couldn't go ahead and knock runners in. And there's a great interview somewhere you can find on YouTube where Robin Ventura is making fun of that, which is fantastic. Overshadowed also an issue at number 4 for John Matlack, because, right? I mean, kind of similarities in terms of he's on another team. If the other pitchers aren't in front of him, if you don't have that kind of cushion of you're not the star, right, Brian? So we're not paying attention to you. Maybe more people would know just how great Matlack was during those years.
Yeah, I mean, he is definitely the number 3 in this big 3 with Seaver and Kuzman. But he was the Rookie of the Year in 1972 and the best pitcher for the Mets in 1973 down to the last month when they really needed big pitching performances when they were in the race for the NL East and eventually won it. He was their top starter. Made 3 straight All-Star games from 74 through 76. If you take away his last season with the Mets, 77, that was then he didn't have an ERA above 3.5. So he was remarkably consistent. One year in particular that I want to point out, in which he was Jacob deGrom before Jacob deGrom, was in 1974. He led the league in shutouts. He led the league in fielding independent pitching. He had a 2.41 ERA. His ERA plus was at 149, and for that, his final record was 13 wins and 15 losses.
Which back when didn't get any credit, but now would have been looked at totally differently, right? You talk about being in the wrong era.
Yeah, he probably would have gotten Cy Young votes, and back then they were like, "Well, you had a losing record, so no, we're not going to vote for you." So the dinosaurs have yeah.
And that's how you get underrated, because a lot of that is, right, everybody's not looking at the right statistics. And again, it's ironic because in Hundley's case, going way back at number 9, it's like we probably respected it more before we kind of look back at the steroid era. Now, and the further you get away, the less it's been respected, right? In this case, you would hope much more so for a guy like Matlack. Franco at 10, Todd Hundley at 9, Al Leiter at 8, Jerry Grody at 7, John Sturd at 6, Rick Reed at 5, John Matlack at 4, and then at number 3, Carlos Beltran. Carlos Beltran, to me, his career as a Met is as follows. One horrific year after he had played, people forget he had played in Kansas City in a small market where they have 2 beat writers, and then he had one postseason with Houston where he hit the 8 home runs, and then he signs the big contract, and then he's thrust into New York, was worse than Francisco Lindor was in his first year. But just like Tino Martinez, who a lot of people forget when he was taking over for Donnie, did not play well and was not good initially before the 44 homers and the big postseasons, right? Just like a lot of other sports, it happens when guys come to New York and fail. Beltran took a year, and I remember it was 8 games into the second season. They were already booing him. They gave him like a week. And he was able to have the fortitude, like Edwin Diaz. Here's another guy, right? Came from a small place, Seattle. Okay, how do I do it? And ironically, he would have been Diaz's manager if things had been different. But Beltran, to me, after the first year, and I know you can't take it out, even as a composite, for me, I think of Mike Piazza, David Wright, and I think of Carlos Beltran in terms of position players, right? After the first year, he was probably the most consistent hitter the Mets ever had.
Oh, I think so. I think so, absolutely. I think fans have come to appreciate Beltran for what he did as a player, since 2006 NLCS strike 3, even after what happened with the situation in Houston that led to him not being the Mets manager. That said, I still don't think people realize how good he was. He's the best free agent signing the Mets ever made.
Ever.
He's the best center fielder the Mets ever had. And as you said, top 3 position player in Mets history. You take, like I said, like you said, take 2005 away, fantastic. 2006, that second year, I mean, he was MVP level, and he tied Hundley's record for home runs in a season, drove in 116 runs, and was 4th in MVP voting. And then on top of that, he was a terrific fielder, fantastic range, never made anything look difficult out there in the outfield, and won 3 Gold Gloves for that. So he was just an all-around, 5-tool player, as they say.
Yeah, I could say it's because he's actually a friend. He's one of the good dudes in the game. But Mike Cameron, who was a hell of a center fielder himself, and thank God they survived what happened in San Diego. But there weren't many guys in that time period who were going to move him over to right field. The whole situation with Beltran, the fact that he was so good and consistent is one thing. The other thing is he was so clutch. Like everybody thinks about the Wainwright at bat, but I remember the 12th inning homer against the Phillies late in the year. There were so many times where he was coming up with clutch at bats. His base stealing, I don't know how it is now, but I think when he retired, he was the most, like accurate or effective or whatever word you want to use, successful base stealer percentage wise. I think with whatever the minimum is of like all time, he never got thrown out. And because of what you pointed out in the outfield, it was just, he ran like a gazelle. Like the strides it didn't even look like he was trying to run hard. He got crapped on so much for that Wainwright at bat. And I think because of the money he got paid, and that's really what it is. If he had come up a Met and was homegrown and that happened, it would have been forgotten. You know it as well as I do. Because he got paid, it was, well, in that spot, right? I don't care what you did all year. That's your spot to hit a home run. Right? Nobody got it. I love Cliffy. Cliffy, who was, I think, the AB right before that, or anybody else who hit the whole game. It wasn't like, by the way, there was a whole game that led up to that, right? People forgot all of that and just remembered this one at bat, but he was way more clutch, I think, Brian, than people give him credit for as a Met over the years.
Oh yeah, and I remember his at bat against the Cardinals in August of that year. He had it was a 2-run homer to win it, and that was his defining moment of the season up until the NLCS. And yeah, you said he never got caught. I mean, I'm looking at his stats. He got
like never, right?
2006, he got caught stealing 3 times. 2007, 2. 2008, 3. 2009, 1. Although it was shortened a little bit. So yeah, I mean, he just knew when to steal. Sometimes that's almost as good as just being really fast. It's just knowing when to steal a base.
Well, so we're talking about guys who, when you could do everything. Five tool is the most overrated, overused term. It's not overrated. It's overused. It's put on guys who don't. I remember Alex Ochoa was supposed to be a five tool. Speaking of like annoying names of the past from the Mets, right? But this guy was it. I mean, he did everything well, everything on a baseball field. Beltran at 3. Number 2 is a guy who was unassuming, and I still believe had maybe, I'd have to think about it, but maybe the sweetest swing to watch of any Met during our lifetime, and that's John Olrude, who he was so good. And the thing that stands out to me about Olrude that people don't talk about enough, everybody talks about Robin Ventura. Look, I love Robin Ventura, right? And he would be on here if we didn't talk about the Grand Slam single 1,000 million times, because because of that, nothing he did was ever underrated. And I love Robin. He drove in 120 runs, won a Gold Glove. He had all kinds of, in 3-4 years, whatever it was with the Mets. But everybody talks about that infield, and they talk about Ventura. And Olrude, Ventura will be the first one to tell you, was the biggest reason the other 3 guys were as good as they were. He was as good a defensive first baseman, other than Keith, obviously, that the Mets have ever had. Rico Brogna was great too, but Olrude was just brilliant. But Brian, he was so big in those games in '99. People forget. Go to the NLCS, and they're back-to-back games. He hits home runs. One that I think was off Smoltz to open a game. He hit a home run off Maddox in that series. He was so big in that run of September into. For all the Mike Piazza's here and what's Hundley going to do, and Robin Ventura hits this and everything else that went on, John Olrude was probably the best hitter during those 2 months, and no one ever even discusses it when they look back at '99. It's crazy to me.
Yeah, I think now we're giving a little more appreciation to players, especially back then, who contributed in other ways other than just hitting it over the fence, whether it was fielding or getting on base, drawing walks, getting, singles, what have you. And John Olrude, I think, is at the forefront of that, retroactive appreciation. It was only 3 years in New York, but it was 3 just terrific years. He had an on-base percentage over 425 and OPS plus of 142. And 99, he was really clutch. I remember he hit a NLDS home run against Randy Johnson. No left-hander hits a home run.
He had home runs off Johnson, Smoltz, and Maddox in that postseason. Think about that.
But 98, even though the Mets missed the postseason by a game, that was especially ridiculous. He had the highest batting average by a Met in a single season, the highest on-base percentage by a Met in a single season at 447,
which is crazy.
His OPS plus was 163. So you take all of that, you take his, as you said, his fielding. He's getting more deserved praise, not just for his Met career, but I think his overall career. Because it's so overlooked, and because it happened in the 90s, it's just like we just forget about it because he wasn't Barry Bonds or Mark McGwire hitting a bunch of home runs, but he was getting on base.
Brian, he's so unassuming that I don't know the reason he wasn't at Old Timers Day, but I would almost guarantee you he thanked Jay Horowitz for and said I'm just wherever I am in my humble home with my family doing whatever, and I don't want even. He just didn't want any of that, right? But for a guy like that mentality to succeed at the level he did in New York is amazing. People have this idea that you have to have some brash personality, right? People would be and I'm trying to think of a million guys that people have said, well, this guy wouldn't survive in New York and that guy couldn't survive in New York. John Olrude's personality, you would never think would survive in New York. And he didn't seem to be fazed by anything, literally nothing. So it's amazing, and it's part of what underrated him was almost going back to Al Leiter, right? The way he acted made him more beloved. I think the way John Olrude acted made you respect him more, but almost you unappreciated because he didn't do anything to make you pay attention to him except wear the helmet. I mean, honestly, that was the one thing, right? I mean, am I wrong? His swing was his personality. Sweet, right? Sweet and pretty, but okay, next, right? No bat flips from John Olrude. That
the helmet was his distinguishing feature,
it.
and I think didn't he take this, like Mark Canada, didn't he take the subway to a game? I don't know
Yes.
if did anyone recognize him? I don't
Probably
know.
not. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, like people barely heard him talk, but he was just so great, and I'm glad that we give him credit here. 10, John Franco. 9, Todd Hundley. 8, Al Leiter. Jerry Grody at 7. John Stearns at 6. Rick Reed at 5. John Matlack at 4. Carlos Beltran at 3. John Olrude at 2. And at number 1, Hojo. Howard Johnson is not only the most underrated Met of all time, but he may have been one of the more underrated players in that era that he played. And I know we talked about this before, and I always say this, like when family member, anytime I'm discussing Howard Johnson, it's very Hundley-like in this way. Like Hundley got screwed when Piazza came in. Howard Johnson got screwed because everyone else was out, was leaving. And it was the after 86 season. And he wasn't Ray Knight, who, look, small time period, but we understand what he did, right? He wasn't Darryl Strawberry. And then it was always, well, the disappointment of Doc or Darryl and what's going on off the field, not the performance of Howard Johnson trying to keep them in things, right? What he was doing on the field. How much was Hojo a victim of just kind of almost being like seemingly a year or two off from being the guy that we would remember from that time period?
Yeah, Howard Johnson had 3 30-30 seasons, and they were all in years in which the Mets were disappointing or underachieving or completely falling apart. Because 87 was his breakout year, of course, just the year after the World Series. And then he had another, this next one came in 89, which might be the best offensive season in Mets history. That's up for debate with like guys like John Olrude and Piazza and
Beltran.
whoever else you want.
Yeah,
and Beltran. So, and then in 91, the Mets completely fell apart at the end of the year. And that was the year he led the league, I think, in home runs and RBI. So like there you have 2 of the 3 Triple Crown categories he was leading the National League in. So, I mean, if these happened in 86 or 88, he'd be an MVP candidate and might win the MVP. But the timing was off. And we look at those 3 seasons, and then we look at like his overall rankings. He's still in the 4th in Mets history in home runs. He's still 4th in runs batted in, and he's 3rd in stolen bases behind Reyes and Mookie. So it just happened that it was post World Series. The continued missing of the postseason or missing the World Series again when they were supposed to. And just being there when everything was kind of going downhill gets Howard Johnson overlooked. And it's completely because of his past falling out with the Wilpon era or regime is why he's an egregious omission from the Mets Hall of Fame. That should be rectified rather soon, but it's just he just gets completely overlooked. I mean, he got completely overlooked by the franchise by not putting him in the Mets Hall of Fame. But yeah, he's way up there in so many offensive categories and doesn't get the respect I think he deserves.
And with Steve Cohen, you kind of almost feel like that'll be rectified in some way because he just has found a way to one thing after another, right? Knock everything off from the black jerseys to, obviously, and lots in between this, but Willie Mays in his retirement in most recent terms. John Franco at 10, Todd Hundley at 9, Al Leiter at 8, Jerry Grody at 7, John Stearns at 6, Rick Reed at 5, John Matlack at 4, Carlos Beltran at 3, Olrude at 2, Hojo at number 1. I want to close this way because I feel like to at least kind of put a final touch and a spin on it because you spent so much time paying attention to Mets history, right? You mentioned it. We talked about like favorite and best are 2 different things, right? You can have a favorite and it's first of all, best is even an opinion in a lot of cases because what stats are you looking at and all of that for player or team? But you mentioned your favorite team maybe being 99, right? And a favorite run that the Mets had. Where does this team right now, and we don't know how they finished the last 27, 28 games, right? I know how many games over 500 they are first since 88, right? They got a chance clearly to chase down the 108 from 86. They'd have to go 23-6 in their last 29, which with this schedule is actually doable. They're probably going to win about 105 games, which is still, by the way, pretty darn good. where do you put them now? Like, how far up are they in terms of the best Met teams ever from how much you've kind of gone through 69, 73, 99, 2000, 2006, right? Which is the 88, which are kind of the group of the other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I can never even, not knowing what's going to happen, I still can't go like above the 2 World Series teams. It's just like it's almost like it's just
Sure.
impossible to do that right
Sacrilegious.
now.
Sure.
So
Totally.
yeah, but I would say it's better than I would say it's better than 88. I think the 88 team, if I'm recalling, I mean, they had a stretch in like the middle of the year where they were just kind of like a 500 team. I mean, they started really hot and they ended really hot. In between, they were kind of okay. I mean, they were
99 had the
500.
same problem. 2015 had the
Yeah.
same problem.
I think this team has been so consistent. They haven't lost more than 3 games in a row, which is insane. Which is just remarkable, a remarkable run of consistency that it needs to be recognized in terms of just how steady this team has been. Because everyone on Mets Twitter just thinks that everything is going to be the end and going to be the end. The season ended
Of course.
60 different times.
Yeah, of course.
So,
right.
and everyone who wants to do that has been proven wrong.
And the culture, a big
60
part of that.
plus.
Not to interrupt, but the culture, which we can't put in a stat sheet, but Buck and Max and Escobar even, and those guys and what they've done, Canna, the way they have completely changed. I said this many years ago because I was covering it and watching it at the time. I remember Jim Leland was a Tiger manager for like a week, and he like was throwing tables, freaking out after a loss. And he did it on purpose because he wanted the team to realize we're not accepting losing anymore, right? This team won't collapse. They may lose the division. They may lose in the first. Who knows what's going to happen? But it won't be in the old way. And I think a lot of that is culture. I would put it this way for me. I think when you talk about pitching, it's the best pitching that they've had since '86. It's hard to say otherwise. I think the lineup is in some places really great, in some places really not. The lineup in 2006 was better than this. The lineup in 1999 was better than this. And to me, I think if we're going like from the 80s to here, the two best lineups I think the Mets had were 99 and in 2006. I mean, the 2006 lineup when they were healthy, people don't remember. They should go look. I mean, think about the names we're talking about with Reyes at his peak and David Wright and Carlos Beltran and Delgado and Cliff Floyd. I mean, are you kidding me? And even LaDuca. Like, they didn't have any weaknesses anywhere. And 99, when you had Ricky Henderson, Alfonso, Olrude, Piazza, Ventura, like, good luck, right? I mean, it was ridiculous. The bullpen here is also, it's weird because Diaz is so much better than what you and I are used to, but the rest of the bullpen isn't really very good. So, I haven't kind of figured out where to kind of composite them, but I think to your point, until they make the World Series, right, you can't go ahead of the others. I think they're probably a better team than 88, a better team than 99, a better team than 2000. I think they have better pitching than 2006. I don't think starting pitching. When you go back to 2006 and Billy Wagner at the back end in that lineup, and I know they didn't win the World Series, but look, this team hasn't either yet. I don't know if they're necessarily a better team overall than that team right now. They're starting pitching, which is clearly most important, and you hope will be the differentiator. Because remember, Oliver Perez started the game that they lost, and Aaron Heilman was in there, right? So, right, I don't know that they're a better team yet than 2006. 2006, I think, gets underrated. I know they lost to the Cardinals, but that team was the best team in baseball. They should have won. That was a disappointment to me that they didn't. That team was that good.
Yeah, I think 2006. It's weird because the league that year, I think the Mets were, compared to the rest of the teams in the league, the Mets were the best team.
Absolutely.
Where this year, you compare to, the Dodgers
Braves,
are going to win
Astros,
113.
even, right?
Yeah, it's more even. But I feel like the Mets can be, or I feel are a better just overall team than 2006. I think the pitching especially takes them over the top. I mean, I know you're saying about the lineup. The 2006 lineup was so good.
It may be the best lineup the Mets have ever had.
Yeah,
right.
I feel like
speed wise too, with Reyes and Beltran, right?
Oh yeah. But I think like the overall, just I don't know. It's just the overall lack. I mean, honestly, there's a lack of there are weak spots, but I feel like it's just the composite group is better than 2006, where I feel like 2006, the pitching, it was just like, I mean, all due respect to Steve Traxel, I mean, I was
No,
not
of course,
counting on him in a
no,
big
of course,
start.
and a better manager. And I like Willie, and I think Willie gets crapped
Yeah,
on it. He's been underrated, I
yeah,
believe. I mean, it
yes.
really, he was way better than only getting 4 years as the manager of the Mets. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. He got screwed for a lot of, even though Guillermo Mota was in a game he shouldn't have been. It wasn't his fault that Wagner gave up a home run to So Taguchi. It's like, I mean, it's like people like remember what they want to remember. Like, I love Billy Wagner. No one ever brings that up. Billy Wagner gave up 2 huge home runs. Like Jerry's Familia, we remember, but somehow with Alex Gordon, right? We forgot Billy Wagner. So Taguchi. I mean,
Yeah,
really? I mean, come on. So what? Brian,
yeah.
appreciate you. Thanks for running this back again. As I said in the last one, but I'll say this time now that everyone will hear. At the end of the season, I want to come back and do, and we'll discuss it, you and I, whether or not it's the overrated or most aggravating, something that allows us to delve into, because I think the reaction and the Twitter responses of some of the names that we forget on the lists of like pains in the asses in Mets history, because there are so many. Ryan Thompson. I mean, how many guys can you think about that? Like, we're supposed to be great that we're not. We'll have to come back to that. In the meantime, I in safe travels. I know you're going on vacation, at least for a couple of days, and you and I will recoup here in a little bit after hopefully a Mets World Series.
Sounds great, Casey. Looking forward to it.
All right, buddy. Unfiltered Revolution. The merch is up on the site. Get me at Casey Stern. Get Brian at Brian Wright 86, and we will see you soon on Unfiltered.